not to target Moscow. Donald Trump commented on reports by American media that he allegedly discussed strikes on the Russian capital with President Zelensky. The press asked the head of the White House about this conversation. Does Trump think that Zelensky should actually carry out such a strike? And the American president replied that, in his opinion, Kiev should not target Moscow. Donald Trump also denied having any intention to provide Ukraine with long-range weapons, as had previously been reported by international media. The 50-day deadline given to the Kremlin to sign a truce was called a very long period of time by the U.S. president. If this does not happen, Trump promises new sanctions and stated that he believes a truce could be reached even sooner.
At the end of the 50 days, if we don't reach an agreement, it will be very bad. Tariffs will be extended and other sanctions will continue. Should Zelensky focus more on Moscow or go deeper into Russia? No, he shouldn't target Moscow.
The NATO Secretary General called for pressure to be put on the Kremlin, India, China, and Brazil. Mark Rutte emphasized that these countries will face secondary sanctions if Putin does not agree to peace in Ukraine. The Secretary General of the alliance noted that India, China, and Brazil could suffer greatly from these sanctions, especially because they continue to trade with the aggressor country. Let me remind you, the U.S. president promises to impose 100% trade tariffs if Moscow does not agree to a peace deal with Kiev within 50 days. The NATO Secretary General made his statement after speaking with American senators. At the moment, the bill they proposed, which provides for new sanctions against Russia, has been put on hold to give room for the U.S. president's peace initiatives. The 18th package of sanctions against Russia has still not been adopted. At a meeting in Brussels, EU foreign ministers were unable to reach an agreement on new restrictions. This was reported by Radio Liberty journalist Richard Jazwiak. Two countries turned out to be opponents of the adoption. These are Slovakia and Malta. They want guarantees of compensation for possible damages in the event of a complete ban on the supply of Russian gas to the European Union. The Slovak Prime Minister was personally asked to lift the veto by his Czech counterpart, Petr Fiala. However, they rejected these appeals. They explained this as protecting national interests. In Malta, however, according to Politico, there are concerns that a price cap on the Kremlin's energy resources could negatively affect the country's tanker fleet. According to the new proposal, Brussels planned to lower the price of Russian oil from $60 to $45 per barrel, ban the operation of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, and impose restrictions on Russian banks and military technologies. It is preliminarily known that discussions on the sanctions package at the level of EU country ambassadors will continue tomorrow. The EU's chief diplomat, Kaja Kallas, had high hopes for a positive decision regarding its adoption, and also commented on Donald Trump's latest statements.
We truly welcome the news from the United States that they will provide Ukraine with weapons so it can defend itself. Of course, we also hope to reach a political agreement on the 18th sanctions package. We are very, very close. I hope it happens today. We are working on the oil price cap. This issue is still alive, so hopefully we will reach an agreement. As I have already said, even if the Americans do not support it, but other G7 countries do, we will still move forward.
Germany will lead the process of transferring air defense systems to our country. Chancellor Friedrich Merz discussed this with the American president. Germany is ready to pay for the systems. Now Berlin and Washington are negotiating the supply of American air defense systems. This was stated in Washington by Defense Minister Boris Pistorius. Before this, Donald Trump announced for the first time his readiness to sell weapons to Ukraine and threatened Russia and its allies with tariffs if Putin does not end the war within 50 days. Natalia Freibrick from Berlin found out when to expect the American Patriots.
The idea to buy and transfer Patriot batteries for Ukraine was discussed by German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius with his American counterpart Pete Hegseth over the phone a few weeks ago. A political agreement could be signed within a matter of days, but the actual deployment in Ukraine will take a few more months. The German minister stated this after a meeting in Washington.
I spoke with Pete Hegseth about this a few weeks ago over the phone, and during our conversation, I suggested that Germany purchase 2 Patriot systems from the Americans and transfer them directly to Ukraine. Simply considering the situation with the supply and maintenance of the Patriot systems, we cannot transfer another one of our own systems, but we are ready to purchase 2 such systems given the necessity that none of us can ignore, that Ukraine needs more systems.
The financing model is simple. The U.S. provides the equipment. Europeans pay the bill. Pistorius publicly called on the rest of the NATO members to open their wallets. At the same time, Berlin asked the Pentagon to sell Typhon launchers, which are capable of launching cruise ballistic missiles up to 2,000 kilometers. There is no formal agreement yet, but Hegseth called the request interesting and promised to consider it. Trump also considered supplying Ukraine with Tomahawk cruise missiles, which are capable of reaching Moscow and St. Petersburg. But for now, they have been excluded from the supply list. Federal Chancellor Friedrich Merz called Trump's decision an important initiative and assured that Germany will play a key financial role. According to the Chancellor, this will help stop the Russian bombing terror and strengthen the security of Europe itself. While Pistorius was at the Pentagon, in the Oval Office, U.S. President Donald Trump made a sharp turn from his usual rhetoric. In the presence of NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, he announced his readiness to sell weapons to Ukraine and issued an ultimatum to the Kremlin. If Russian aggression does not stop within 50 days, the U.S. will impose 100% secondary tariffs against Russia's trading partners because talks with the Kremlin dictator mean nothing. And even his wife is now telling the American president about this.
I talk to him a lot to get this done, and I always hang up and say, well, that was a pleasant call. And then missiles fly toward Kyiv or another city. And I say, strange. And when this happens 3 or 4 times, you start to think that these conversations mean nothing. My conversations with him are always very pleasant. They seem very nice. And then that night, missiles are launched. I go home and tell the First Lady that I spoke with Volodymyr today. We had a great conversation, and she says, really? And another city has just been shelled.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy has already thanked the United States and called the decision critically important for saving lives. Last night, the president of Ukraine had a phone conversation with both Donald Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte.
I am grateful to President Trump for his willingness to support us in NATO.
The protection of our people's lives.
Ukraine may receive the first Patriot batteries in a few months. The U.S. is ready to provide the equipment, while Europe will pay the bill. Reporting from Berlin, Natalia Fibrik, TSN 1+1.
An unexpected ally of Ukraine in the White House. Western media and social networks exploded with headlines about the support for Ukraine from the First Lady of the United States after yesterday's story from Donald Trump. The Times published a headline. Did Melania become the reason why Trump turned his back on Putin? Journalists write that despite her formal status as First Lady, she remains one of the most influential voices in the U.S. president's inner circle regarding the war in Ukraine. And even at the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, she publicly condemned the war and now reminds her husband about the scale of destruction and the casualties in Ukraine. Even despite the ongoing negotiations with the Kremlin, the media also draws attention to Melania's background. She was born in Slovenia, so she may have a deeper understanding of the threat posed by Moscow's aggressive policies. Meanwhile, Ukrainian social media users have jokingly started calling the First Lady of the U.S. a Ukrainian agent, Trumpenko, who works for Kiev's interests in the White House. In posts, Melania is depicted wearing a traditional embroidered shirt with a trident emblem. There are also posts where Trump's wife is awarded an army cap with the Ukrainian flag. After Trump's statements, the Scandinavian countries also put forward an initiative to fund weapons for our country. Denmark's Foreign Minister Lars Rasmussen stated that they are ready to invest in the purchase of Patriot systems. The diplomat noted that the details are still being worked out, but already emphasized Washington's willingness to sell these weapons. Meanwhile, the Swedish Prime Minister, responding to yesterday's statements by Trump, promised that his country will continue to contribute to the rapid and substantial delivery of weapons to Ukraine. The official welcomed Washington's new policy on supplying more advanced weapons to Ukraine and increasing economic pressure on Russia, noting that the sooner the Allies unite to force the Kremlin to end the war, the more lives will be saved. Training of mercenaries on foreign territories. Russia has set up camps for training mercenaries in Serbia, as well as in Bosnia and Herzegovina. However, they organized the coup d'etat in Moldova. Details of the campaign are covered in an investigation by Balkan Insight. The journalists report they were training Moldovan citizens. Before the training began, they were required to hand over their phones and passports. They were taught, among other things, how to operate drones, and for 10 days of training, according to one of the participants, they were offered between $300 and $500. The training was conducted last year from August to October, in order to later try to disrupt the presidential elections in Moldova, which took place in the fall. However, the Russian plans did not come to fruition. The pro-European Maia Sandu won the election, and the prosecutor's office of Bosnia and Herzegovina launched an investigation into these mercenary camps. Meanwhile, Serbia, which is traditionally loyal to Moscow, has so far not commented on the situation.